question for us nowadays is very simple, especially in terms of the future of Europe. Who Hungary is, in fact. It's a black sheep or a success story. That's where we are. So that a fair sharing of burden is the basis for the political and economic success as well. The second guideline was empowerment. Empowerment means empowering the middle class. Because of course we have a lot of difficulties with the poor people, and many Hungarians are living under very difficult conditions. But if you would like to generate some economic achievement and results, we must support the middle class as well. Those who would like to base their existence and their family existence on activity, on labor, on responsibility. So we have to support the middle class by the policy of empowerment. That's the reason why we created a family-based tax system, family-based flat tax system, very low-level corporate taxation, and so on and so on. And the third point was renewal. So if you look back, but the young generation is difficult to do so. So if you look back the last 20 years of the economic and social policies of the so-called post-communist countries, the discussion was always about austerities, reforms, structural reforms whatsoever. And we made very clear that even structural reforms are not enough. So what Hungary needs is a total renewal. Probably you can agree with me that a modern society, everyday life, based on 4 basic code, legal regulation: the constitution, the civic code, the penalty law, and the labor code. And we changed all 4. So now we have a completely new constitution, a completely new civic code, a completely new penalty code, and new labor code. And we created in 3 years' time more than 400 laws by the Hungarian parliament. Approximately 70 of them, as we call, 2/3 majority requested law. So it's a total renewal. It's not a structural reform or reform, it's not austerity, it's something different. It's total renewal of the society and reorganization of the society, which is not easy for the people anyway. So it's not a popular move. Probably it has sense, we have arguments, but in the everyday life it means that we ask the families to reorganize or at least rethink your personal and family life strategy, which is the most difficult thing in the politics. So we started from 85 and now we are in 77, and we continue to decline. The budget deficit in 2010 was more than 7%, and now it's year by year less than 3%. Activity rate is moving up. We organized a new public work system. So we provide, if the market is not able to do so, we provide state-organized public works for those who have no other chance to base their existence on labor. So all that kind of decisions lead us to a higher activity rate. So that's the reason why when we have a lot of critical remarks from the European Union, at the same time we have clear remarks. So if you take into consideration the 6 most important economic indicators about the country, which is a general description in the European Union, indebtedness is okay because it's decreasing, budget deficit is okay because it's below 3%, foreign trade is very positive, foreign account is very positive, activity rate is moving up. The only challenge for us is economic growth, because we don't have economic growth basically. We were able to create economic growth in 2011, but we lost that kind of activity of our economy in 2012. So we came up by 1.7 and came back by 1.7 1 year later. So this is the situation in Hungary. Then we have to find an answer why in Europe so many people would like to describe Hungary more like a black sheep and less as a success story. I think there are 2 reasons for that, and this is the point which could be even interesting for a Polish one. The first is the conflict of interest. When I say sharing of burden, it sounds nice. Everybody agrees with that. It means that from nowadays, the bank should pay a strong taxation they don't like so much anymore. So the involvement of the financial institutions into the burden sharing process, we insulted a lot of interest of the West European nations, because the bank sector basically in Hungary are falling off. Okay, burden sharing is nice, but when multinational companies are taxed, they are not happy at all. When we say energy taxation should be higher, commercial trade should be higher, and so on and so on, you know, not exclusively foreigners, not exclusively West Europeans, because many big Hungarian companies are taxed as well by the same way, but all in all, it's a new development for the West European capital owners who get back less capital or profit comparing with the previous years. So that's one of the group of the reasons why so many European Union countries, big companies, even some bureaucrats in the European Union opposing what we are doing, because it's a loss as they understand the European economy from their point of view. The second is ideological reason, or may I say a conflict of ideas. I would like to be sophisticated, but because of the limited time, I have to be a little bit oversimplified on that issue. The issue of ideas is the most complicated issue also. But what we could be brave enough to say that now in the European institutions and in many European countries, even in the governments and in the media or the public discussion area, there is a clear majority for those who represent different kind of values and ideas what we do represent in Hungary. So it's easy to say liberal or something like that, but it's not sophisticated enough. The point is that the mainstream decision makers in Europe now, and those who have that decision makers belonging to a stream or mainstream of ideas and the vision about Europe, that the future will look like more that instead of religiously based life, the society should be less religious based and more secularized. Instead of having a strong national feeling and national identity, the future of Europe should be more about the supranational something. The drive to understand, which based on families, more precisely on family, they think that future should be built on families, various types of families, which is strongly disagree. So the point is that in Europe, many people think, the mainstream think that churches, religious feelings, nation, and family belong to the past of the continent, and the vision on the future is totally different. Then this is the process what they call progress. And now there's a 2/3 majority in a country like Hungary saying, no, we have another vision. We think that religious values, life, churches, nation, and family not exclusively belong to the past of the European continent, but that belong to the future. That's how we would like to look. This is the other reason why we have let's say, a field of conflicts which can be characterized not just economic counter-interest, but at the same time, you know, how to say it, dispute over the values and vision of Europe. So this is another very important element. Okay, all in all, the question is still open. So I think Hungary is fighting for the status of being a success story. We think that in the forthcoming years, each or all European nations should fulfill 3 requirements at the same time: reducing the indebtedness of the state, improving the competitiveness, and at the same time maintain the public support and the social peacefulness and cooperation. So those nations who are able to manage that will be successful. Who are not able to do so, they have far more limited chance to be successful. And Hungary could belong to the first group. So I would not like to say that we have a victory. It's not true. We have a good chance for victory. I think we are very close to reach a victory. So I think if the figures, especially in economy, because this is the modern world in Europe, if the figures on economy in the forthcoming several months or half year will underlying and strengthening what I just have described here, Hungary will be not anymore perceived as a black sheep, but more as a success story. We have a good chance for that, and I would not like to deny the fact that because of the pressure coming from the European bureaucrats, European capitals and business centers, it's not easy to survive that kind of pressures for political leaders as I am, and the political party as we are. And in that respect, just one remark, I have to be very much grateful and say thank you very much for the Polish people who supported us based on Central European solidarity and history in the difficult moments when Hungary was alone, and only very few nations, among them the Polish one, was brave enough to support us, even me personally, to help Hungary and our political family to survive that huge international pressure we have suffered at that time. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much. Now it's the time for discussion. I will ask you a few questions, then I will ask you to ask a question to Prime Minister. Since this situation is less official, I have a small surprise. I know that you know what I've been doing last year, but I don't know if you know the results. This is my book about you. The title of the book is, in English, it sounds like striker. It refers to your football passion, but also to the way you're being active. You are active in public life. Are you really a striker? Is it a good description of your political nature?
Being aggressive is a positive description in America, anyway. The strikers are always aggressive. In Europe, being called aggressive is rather nasty and negative. So I must be very careful to take the title of this book. But if we take it into consideration in a deeper sense, but I think this is not a personal meeting, so I would like to come back somehow politics later on. But you know, the reason how our generation and myself found himself into politics is important. So this generation I belong to was never educated for politics. Our choice was never a career decision. Now it's, if I look at the younger generation, you know, we are living in freedom now, the young generation could say, okay, I would like to find a way of career in the academic life, in the free economy, entrepreneurship, or in politics. That was not the case in the 80s. If there is a country where it should be not explained, is Poland anyway. So we were involved into politics for moral reasons. So it was not a career decision, but a feeling of moral compulsory to deal with not only our personal life, but to deal with the community. I do remember I was first time in West Europe together with a lady who is later on became my wife in 84. And I do, you know, railway, conserves, money in the socks, you know. So okay. And when we came back after 30 days, the last stop was in Vienna. And we had a very serious conversation, probably the most serious in our common life ever. Whether to go to the train which is moving to Budapest or stay in Vienna. Because the dilemma was whether to choose freedom, which means stay in Vienna, but you cannot see nobody who is important for your personal life, including your parents, brothers, whatsoever, or to choose the life what you do have in Hungary and forget about freedom. So that was the dilemma in the beginning of the 90s. And when we realized several years later that the communist system is somehow under a crisis and the whole Soviet Union future is in trouble, it was a moral compulsory to match again, to unify again freedom and your personal life. And therefore we thought that now you have to fight for freedom. If you would like to live and your kids would like to live in a free country, now you have to fight against the communist regime, now you have to fight against the Soviet Union, now you have to sacrifice your energy in order to liberate your country. So that was the reason why we stepped into politics. And we stayed there for several reasons anyway. That kind of motivation is still the #1 motivation. So this generation in the Hungarian politics should not be seen as, let's say, European type of politicians. You know, managing of public affairs, having an existence based on politics, doing their job, you know, sometimes badly, sometimes nicely. So this is not the guys who we are. So in this sense, we still, regardless that the circumstances change enormously, we still have a motivation to find an answer for what the hell are we doing what we are doing. What the hell I am doing in the politics. And if there is no moral motivation, I don't do it. So that's the reason why to say striker, to find the real sense of the game, which means goal. So if you understand the word striker in that way, I'm ready to undertake it, because I'm still that kind of guy who are looking for the deeper sense, deeper motivation of the political life than just career success, applauses, you know, decorations, victories. That's nice anyway, good. Salary is not bad, victory is good, loved by people is okay, so I would not like to be hypocrite. But this is not the sense of the job. The sense of the job is totally different. And we have, it's very, may I say in Poland, it has a sense of Christian-based political life. So when you build, in the Hungarian language, we have some coincidences. The country, the expression of country, when we say that we build our country, it means that we build our nation. But in the Hungarian language, build the country of the God is the same expression. So that double meaning that we have to build the country of the nation and the country of the God is the same thing. It's still legitimate.
When I met you for the first time 24 years ago at the Heroes Corps in 1989 in Budapest, you had this famous speech. You called Russians to leave, Russian troops to leave Hungary. You were very radical at that time. But I'm looking at you now, and what you're doing in Hungarian politics. I see the same guy. I mean, you're still very radical.
My wife's opinion is different. My wife's opinion is regularly that she was married to a guy who was young, athletic kind, you know. Students in a university and not an exhausted, fat politician. So that's how she describes the situation sometimes. Anyway, so the difference is obvious, unfortunately.
But you're still playing football.
The point probably on that speech is important, more important probably than you're thinking. You know, the Polish history is different, even in the history of the anti-communist resistance here, than it was in Hungary. I was involved into the so-called Hungarian anti-communist resistance movement, but it was not comparable what you have done here. The Hungarian was a saloon type, you know. The Polish were the real radical anti-communist country and activists and movements. So we follow closely in the 80s with Solidarity, Solidarność, the story of that, the martial law, and then the difficulties of the activists who we respect very much, who suffered, you know, 6 and 7 years in illegal circumstances. We have never done similar in Hungary. We had a very nice move in '56 revolution. That was the real one. That was the Hungarian move, you know, so that's fine. But after that, we were not able to evolve or to develop a kind of systemic, strong, committed, value-based, all-society resistance like you have done here in Poland. So that's different. Therefore, the character of the whole process of transformation from communist regime to democracy was different than yours, because you had very clear and personalized lightning houses. You know, in Hungary, when we said, that's time for freedom, it would not have sense to say, let's the political prisoners out of the prison, because there were no political prisoners. Nobody. It would not have any sense to legalize the illegal activity, because that was just very slight intellectual type illegal activity. So there was no Vadenza, there was no Solidarność, and you know, I would not like to mention more names because it's complicated politically. But I do remember a lot of heroic guys here from Poland in the second part of the 80s, you know, internationally and in Hungary as well. Even one of the most hated critics of mine here now in Poland, Adam Mitnick, was a friend of mine. That's part of the truth, you know. So we fought together about freedom, regardless that now it's obvious that we had different ideas on mind what freedom means when the communists are out and we have political freedom. Okay, but you know that kind of character, letters from prison, you know, written by Mitnick, it was a very important book for all of us, or the Pope, you know, the Holy Father. Don't be terrified. So that was a very important thing. We had nothing like that. We haven't had nothing like that. So therefore, the process of transformation was successfully managed by the socialists in Hungary to explain the whole process as not an outcome of the resistance of the people, the freedom-loving and democratic circumstances required movement of the people, but a kind and gentle move of leadership, transforming of political leadership itself from dictatorship into democracy. And that was the problem of the whole transformation. How we can explain to the people that what is going on is not because of the nice character of the political leaders, who now are so generous to let us, you know, not to be shot when we stand up for freedom and national sovereignty. And that was the only occasion in the process of the Hungarian transformation, I mean the reburial of 56 revolution victims, which was able to testify and explain to everybody that what is going on is not a smooth movement, that's a real fight for democracy. And this fight of the history as well, whether you belong to the 56th tradition of Hungary or, you know, the Gulyás communism as we call it, you know, the relatively easy life, you know, a combination of a trade union resort and labor camp, you know, so that's how the Hungarian communist regime provided the life for us. So therefore, there was no other option just to be a radical speaker, because that was the only point of the transformation, to explain to the public that what's going on is important, it's about freedom, it's about our life, it's about the Hungarian history, it's about our mission. So therefore, the speech was strong.
But we are now in 2013.
We could say radical. Now sometimes I read it up again, and now my opinion, it was not radical enough. That's my... because at that time, okay, but now...
Yeah, and now we are in 2013. Is it still so necessary to be radical? Is it necessary for leader to set big goals and difficult tasks? We have in Poland discussion whether we should make just small steps and going slowly and carefully, or we should make huge, difficult reforms.
There is one point which related to the past and many points which related to the future. I mean the major challenges. The past. Young generation probably is out of this whole discussion, but the elder generation like mine, and even the others, are still stick to that point or somehow grabbed by that difficulty. So you know, it's very difficult to say that as a result of the transformation from political dictatorship into political democracy, Russian occupied country to a country which have national sovereignty, you know, the people who are still up socially are the same. It's very difficult to say. I mean, privatization, which created the basis for the economic competition in the 90s and the last decade. You know, privatization in Hungary was not based on providing chances for small entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship, but majorly provided chance for ex-communist company leaders, I mean state-owned company leaders, to convert the state property into private one and so on. And somehow the feeling in the Hungarian society is that, I can't say absolutely because it's not true, but in many points of the social strata, still those are above who were above in the communist regime as well. And you know, it's against the heart of the people. And somehow we were not able to manage properly in the 90s and the last decade a more justifiable distribution of possibilities in the society. So that's still related. It's more emotional, more to the heart than to the minds and to the rationalities, but still a problem. And you know, what belongs to the past I can't adjust now. That's a real moral challenge even for me. Because I think that now I can't go back by 20 years to change the history. What I could do now is to open up chances for all talented young guys who would like to be successful, who would like to belong to the more dominant strata of the society, or has that kind of motivation. That's a real challenge first. The second is that we don't know how Europe will continue. Because the attempt to create a community based on a common currency, but not based on common economic policies and common political systems, now seems to be failing. And therefore it's difficult to understand whether the Eurozone will survive as it is now. It will be stronger, it will be weaker. Should we join, or we should be very cautious, wait and see how to manage the major challenges and questions of the Hungarian economy in relation to the European Union. So that's very, very difficult. 20 years ago, the challenge was easy. When you have seen a social problem in your society or an economic problem, and you looked for the answer, you could say, that is a successful model, just 200 kilometers from Budapest, west direction. The solution is there. Copy, mutatis mutandis, but basically copy what the Westerners have done. And you could be successful as well. Intellectually that was easy, but it's not anymore the case. Because the Eurozone is in trouble, they are more deeper trouble than we are. So therefore to say that we should just do what the Westerners are doing is not the proper answer. Probably we must rely on their experiences, but it's obvious that we can't copy anymore. So therefore the real challenge is for the Central Europeans to create their own answers to all the challenges. So therefore, I don't know what is the answer of the Polish people to the major economic and social strategical questions and challenges, what is the Polish answer, but we have Hungarian answers. And it was not easy to hammer out that kind of answer, but we have done so. The problem is that when you do so in the bureaucratic Brussels headquarters, it is perceived as an anti-European move, as something which you would like, instead of following what Brussels suggests you would like to do something special Hungarian solutions. But it's obvious that we need special Hungarian solutions. So those countries who are in the Eurozone obviously has a spillover impact. So what is going on in one country which belongs to the Eurozone, it has a direct and imminent impact on the others who belong to as well. But those countries who do not belong to the Eurozone, we need more room for maneuvering, flexibility. Because what we are doing, even if it is wrong, it has not so much dreadful consequences immediately to the others than those who are in the Eurozone. So therefore, it's legitimate for those countries who haven't joined to the Eurozone to discuss openly and find a flexible mix of economic decisions and instruments in order to find the proper Polish way, the proper Hungarian way, the proper Lithuanian or Czechish way to improve the living standards of the people. So that's the reason why the conflicts in the forthcoming decades or disputes in the forthcoming years between Brussels and the more flexible politics demanded countries like Hungary will be part of our political life.
I have a very good news. We have 20 minutes more. Now it's time. Now it's time to you. If you would like to ask questions, please raise your hands. There's somebody there.
Bartosz Ostrzewski, Warsaw School of Economics. Dear Prime Minister, I'm really honored to ask a question to you personally. It regards the recent change in the position of the head of National Hungarian Bank, which has been claimed by the former Minister of Economy in your government. At the same time, all 7 members of the Monetary Council are now the nominees of your government, and these actions, in fact, cause a significant loss of share of the independency of National Bank that it has. I kindly ask you here to name the particular actions your government is planning to undertake in order to avoid the situation where the foreign currency reserves held by the National Bank are used to boost the effectiveness of the economic policy of your government, which has been increasingly entrapped in a recent period. And in particular, I'd like to ask you about the procedures ensuring the economic well-being of Hungarians in case of a major speculative attack on foreign. Thank you very much for your answer.
It's more difficult than an exam in the university anyway, but I try to do my best. First of all, the sovereignty and independence of the National Bank is guaranteed by law and by procedures. It's done in the Hungarian constitution. We have some discussion with the European Union, but finally even the Commission said it's okay. So we don't have that kind of difficulty. The second, what kind of leaders could governor of National Bank? That was not my first move to nominate governor for the National Bank. When I was first-time Prime Minister between 1998 and 2002, I had the same challenge. And I did exactly the same now as I had done at that time. At that time, I asked the finance minister of the government to become the governor of the National Bank. That's happened in 2001. Okay, I have done the same thing just now. I personally very much trust the person who is now the governor, because he is a very unique person in the Hungarian economic policy. He's the only finance minister ever in the Hungarian history who decreased the state indebtedness, as just I have described, and was able to force and then keep the budget deficit below 3%. So he was obviously the best candidate for that. Therefore, it's a loss for the government, because he is not anymore the finance minister, but good for the National Bank and good for the Hungarian economy. The so-called reserves. I would be very cautious with that. First of all, it's not the authority of the Prime Minister to deal with that, because national foreign currency reserves belongs to the National Bank. So Prime Minister should be always very cautious to make any remarks on that first. Second, it's a very complicated point. Probably, for a Polish mind, it's not so obvious why it is so complicated. You know, Poland is a big country, Hungary is not. You have 36 or 40 million people, depending on where the borders are anyway. But it's, you know, at least 4 times bigger than the Hungarians we are. And the size of your economy equally far stronger and bigger than the Hungarian one. So therefore, when you think about economic policy, you can take into consideration your internal market as a real factor. Hungary is 10 million people. Our GDP is created basically through by exports. Because, you know, by that size we can't rely on internal market, or just slightly, not as strong as you can do. So it's a different kind of approach to the life. If your economy is as open as the Hungarians, which means far more open than the Polish one, export, import, which means far more exposed to the foreigners than the Polish economy are, or is. You know, you must be very careful with foreign currency reserves, because the country must be financed. So I'm always in favor of very cautious policy in that direction, respecting the exclusive authority of the leader of the National Bank.
What about the foreign?
We have our own currency, still standing. It's okay.
There's a Przemysław Zipler.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. I'm not sure if you know, but this book written by Igor Janke, name shouldn't be Striker, but maybe even better name would have been Savior. When I read this book, I think it should be said, but because you have a lot of friends here in Poland, or here in this room, and many people in Poland, in Polish politics, Polish social life, share your beliefs about the role of history, the role of tradition, national identity. So we are very grateful for those you are doing in your country politics, because this is the kind of politics is the kind of politics we need in Europe as a whole. But I have two major questions. First, role of the state in support of family. You have very huge problems in demography as we have in Poland. You've done some changes in fiscal, in other areas that are affecting family position. Please, I will be very grateful if you describe why this is so important and what is the most important of things you've done in this area. And the second question is, what are the most major common areas of interest between Poland and Hungary nowadays? I forgotten to say I'm a member of Polish Parliament, so
He's from the opposition. Yeah.
He's from the opposition.
So the point is very clearly, as an answer to your second question, that we live very similar geographical position. So we believe between the Russians and the Germans. That's so simple. We try to do good policies, reasonable one, to both directions and so on, but basically, this is a fact. If somebody say that this fact has no relevance, it's against the history. So therefore, we are Central Europeans. Looking back the history, we suffered a lot because Central Europe was not strong enough to defend itself, to create alliances with each other and so on. So I think, regardless that we belong to the European Union, we have consolidated relations to the Russians. We are living where we are living. So therefore, one of the most important points on the agenda, as I see it, to build up Central European cooperation as deep as possible. In terms of security, logistics, trade, so we have to create a living, strong, economically strong Central Europe. And then, of course, we have to run a very clever, well-balanced politics as part of the European Union to the Germans, and another kind of politics, but reasonable similarly to the Russians. But the core of this whole policy is strong Central Europe. Hungary is a 10 million country. Poland is bigger, but if you compare yourself with the others, you have some problem as well. So we have to understand it. And if you are weak, it's not a way how you can defend yourself. Weakness is not the answer. Weakness is the problem. So therefore, we have to have a strong cooperation of the Central European countries. It's well-based. Emotionally is okay, We are sitting here discussing that point. Explaining deeper things, we understand why we are here. Historically, it's okay, We have heroes, common heroes, to both directions. So I think it's a good possibility. The first point is family. Hungary is in trouble in that respect. 42% of the newly born kids are born not in family. I mean, not in couples who are married to each other. 42%. And then there is a demographic decline as well. So we should do something, no question of that. But this is a point where we have to be very careful. The Hungarians are very complicated people. You can't imagine how difficult to govern them. So 10 million freedom fighters every day. And that in the Hungarian mind, there's a special sensor, a special sensor. which is not related to political issues, you know, just because being Hungarian. Whether somebody, whether it's in the government, the Russian, whatever, anybody, would like to interfere in my private life or not? This is the number one question. Based on the researches of value system of the nations, the Hungarians are the 5th most individualistic nation of the world. Just after the Anglo-Saxon nations, we are the number one. So that kind of, you know, freedom-defending approach of the Hungarian people is very, very strong. My house is my castle. My life is my life. My decision is my decision, you know, even with the crowd. So it's very difficult anyway, but at the same time we have strong national feeling. I like that combination. It's difficult, but I like that composition, you know, freedom and nation, that's good. But basically, the problem is that when we would like to create a more family-based politics, that is a double reaction of the people. They think it's okay, because we see the figures, and we saw the families. But at the same time, whether the government would not like to interfere, to force us to certain direction, more pro-family. If they have a feeling that the government would like to push the families or the individuals to the family, they reject it. When we are able to say it's just a possibility, please consider the possibility, they are ready to accept it. So we have to be very, very cautious because of the settle of the values of the Hungarians. I'm absolutely running a policy which is pro-family, no question. Even in the constitution, it's very clear-cut. The human life should be defended from the very first moment of being, you know, existing. So that's written in the constitution. The second, the Hungarian government must be in favor of the life. Third, family is very, very positive, and family would be just a couple, one man, one woman, that's over. So that's very clear. I could be proud for that, but it was created not by me, but even in the middle of the 90s. In the middle of the 90s, the Hungarian Constitutional Court made a decision saying that family means just one man, one woman. So it's not an innovation of the new government, anyway. It's innovation of the God, but anyway, beyond that, it's an innovation of the 90s, you know. So it was what we have done, nothing else. Just the Constitutional Court decision was written into the Constitution, which is important anyway. And that's one of the reasons why we are attacked. You know, politics is complicated. I would not like to criticize anybody, but when you live in a way, you feel somehow, could I say moral or internal, at least internal motivation to organize the world around you as you live. That's the problem. That's the problem. So therefore we must be very much pro-family. Otherwise those who organize differently their personal life will convince us that we should organize our life differently as well. So it's a danger. Be careful with that.
Okay. Michał Orzechowski, journalist. Just very shortly, 2 questions. One, can you admit that you get some inspirations from with your activity today, like outside, with dealing with other countries like Russia, and also internally when you make reforms, getting rid of the old and putting some new people? I mean, did you get inspiration from exactly 2 countries and some leaders of it, Poland and Georgia? If you get with your, like Saakashvili, what he did with this the new generation. And the second question, I know that you cannot interfere into other countries like Poland life. Public life, but can you share some experience how Polish opposition can go around or go through the very big blockade of media, money, political power, and some Euro fundamentalists who are blocking the opposition to go through the, like, what was the secret of your success? Going through or going around? Thank you.
The first question is very simple. I mean, 56 was a motivation for the Central Europe coming from Hungary. We are proud of it. But at the same time, we must be aware of the fact that from the 70s, the motivation came from Poland to all the Central European countries. So the real locomotive of freedom fight and national sovereignty fight was Poland. Back to even 86 to the universities, so, sorry, 68 to the universities, back to the 70 to the workers, Then 76, the core, workers' self-defending committee whatsoever, and then Solidarność. So therefore, an anti-communist attitude political movement obviously considered Poland as an example, no question of that. Today, it's more complicated. First of all, we respected the figures and the results, especially in comparison with the other regional countries. So what the Polish people has done in the recent years is outstanding. I can imagine that you are critical to that, but if you look at the figure, it's obvious, you know. You still have economic growth when Hungary suffered of losing that. But politically speaking, the right, I mean the central right and the right, is constituted in a different way here in Poland than in Hungary. If I try to describe like a map, may I say that you have peace and you have the Prime Minister party. So those guys who are like peace people, but are still ready for cooperation and are radicals, but you know, common sense is important for them. So not those radicals who are over all the rationalities, because we have that kind of radicals as well in our societies, but those who are radicals, but accepting the common sense. So that kind of peace persons in Hungary belongs to our political family. So therefore, we are more rightist, may I say, in that way, than the Polish governing party. On the other side, those semi-socialist, liberals, business-oriented guys who are part of the Prime Minister party here are not part of our political community in Hungary. So therefore, you know, when we speak right, is not the same geography on the political map in Hungary than here. Because those guys who are more business-oriented, liberal, semi-socialist guys, let's say leftist liberals, created their own party in Hungary. They were never part of the central right. They had their own so-called liberal party. And they got huge support in the last 20 years, except the last election, when they were not able to reach the 5% threshold and remained out, happily enough, as we say, from the Hungarian parliament. So we are happy with that. They disappeared, but they never joined our political community. So therefore, the unified right in Hungary, which based on human dignity, Christianity, family, freedom, a little bit more rightist in Hungary on the political map than in Poland. That's the point. And that's the reason why, because it's wide enough in Hungary, it's wide enough, it was able to collect 2/3, I can't say the votes, but 2/3 of the seats in the Hungarian parliament. So that's the job what I have done. In 94, Fidesz, our political community, got 7% of the election. And if the election campaign would have been 2 weeks more or longer, we would out of the parliament. We would have been out of the parliament. That was a very difficult campaign for that. But we somehow stayed in. And then the conservative government lost the election, and we started to rebuild the right. And just 4 years later, in 98, we won the election. So it was 4 years when we built up the first attempt to create a rightist, center-right political family. And then in 2002, we lost the election for several reasons. One of the reasons was that we haven't answered clearly the real question, what kind of political parties could be competitive in the future in the European politics. It was 10 years ago, probably it's difficult to remember that, but 10 years ago in the European politics it was open what kind of political parties we will have in the future. Internet parties, network parties, membership parties, American type, you know, just for election supporting parties or what. And our party did not make the proper decision. We haven't made any decision. And we lost the election. And then I got that lesson and lecture. And in the forthcoming, I mean, after 2002, the next 8 years, we built up a traditional, party-based, strong mobilization capacity, network party, which is far the strongest now in the Hungarian landscape. So our membership is enormous, our supporters are enormous. If I send a letter, let's say in the constitution question, I send a questionnaire to the Hungarian people, to all the 8 million people. We have 8 million voters anyway. I sent 8 million letters to the voters with 13 questions or 14 questions related to the constitution. What should be written into? And I got back out of 8 million, more than 1 million letters. You know, I have that, our political family has that kind of network, which is membership based and strong. So without having, cemented into the society, even in the future politics, you can't be successful. People are still important, not just as voters, but as individuals and actors as well. And you have to ask them to be part of your movement. If they are not part of your movement cannot be successful. And then we reach your second question. And if they are not involved into your activity, they will guided always by media. And media is media. Media everywhere is liberal. Media is always open for innovation, as they call it. We are more traditional party, it's never for us. So therefore, if you would not like to rely on the opinion of media about yourself, you must build up your structure. Look at what's going on in many West European countries. Many conservative parties in Europe must represent a far more leftist-oriented or liberal-oriented opinion just because the media is the only instrument by through they can deliver their messages. And they adjusted themselves, to the media. This is not a normal way of life. It's not in favor of democracy. So therefore, you must have a strong network, personal network, news network, information network, to counterbalance what's going on in the communication area. And then, if you are strong enough, you should not be shy. You must be straightforward at that point. And you should say, it's not healthy for the society if only one kind of approach to the life is represented in the media. And you must find, let's say, traditionally oriented business persons to create media. If they don't do that, how can we compete? The state will never create, because it will be always questioned from the position of democracy, rightly. Whether if you are in a governmental position, to run a government based and supporting public media, it's always, we have all temptation of that, of course. But people don't like it. We have to be aware of that. So if you would like to create a counterbalance to the leftist liberal media through the state channels, you are lost. You can't do that. People will not support it. Bribery is very close to that. So don't do that. Instead of that, you have to build up the private-based, own, talented person-run journals, papers, radio, TV, and whatsoever. We must be competitive in the market competition of media as well. If you are out of that field, we have just limited chances. And don't be shy. If you have instruments for that, if you have businessmen for that, if you can create good environment in regulation by the parliament, just do it. Otherwise, always the leftist liberals will dictate what is right and what is bad. And it's not good for us. So believe me, the best way to be competitive even in that field. I think that's the lesson, at least in Hungary, and I would be not surprised if the lesson will be something similar from Poland as well.
Grzegorz Senatorski, Medical University of Warsaw and Rosary Crusade for Motherland in Poland. The opinion of many people in Poland is that transformation in Hungary was possible due to big national prayer for motherland, and Cardinal Peter Erdo has called Hungarian people to pray for Hungary, and we are on the stage that we must exorcise our parliament, and we did this at our national day at 11th of November. And it is my great pleasure and honor to welcome you, Mr. Premier Minister, to Holy Mass in Budapest at 16 March at 10 o'clock to St. Stephan's, and we will pray for thanks for our saints in history of Poland and Hungary. And if I may, I give you this welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You know, the point is, thank you very much. If America, somebody would like to say that without praying, we could be successful, we could have a successful political life, you know, that would be strange. So, you know, the real spiritual network and roots of any public activity is America, is clearly there, and in Europe we lost it. So that's a very, how to say, deep historical process which should be analyzed. The second point is in Hungary, we must be very careful with the proper understanding of Christianity and in relation Christianity and politics. Because only 14% of the Hungarians are going to church every week at least one time. 14, not 40, 14. And one occasion per year, 40%. So this is the Hungarian situation in relation with the church and that kind of, how to say it, relation. Plus to that, we should know that if you ask the Hungarians whether you are a believer, we had a census just recently, very interesting one. It's very high number saying yes. And if they ask the Hungarians, you are a believer as you think so, or as it prayed or educated and pronounced by the church, you know, those who say, I'm a believer as the church said it, following the guidelines of the church, it's very, very limited. So the majority of the Hungarian society is somehow has a sense and relation to God and that kind of strata of the life, but at the same time don't trust the churches. A very interesting phenomenon. So I think if somebody would like to run purely Christian democratic politics in Hungary, we'll never get the majority. And this is the greatest challenge, and I'm concluding now, this is the greatest challenge for the Christian Democrats in politics now, and believers in the politics, because if you can't pronounce the trust, what the hell would you like to get the majority? What the purpose of it? But if you speak only about truth, and this is not enough to collect the majority, how will you achieve your program? So majority and trust, truth and majority. And this is the most interesting dilemma of the Christian European Christian politicians. And you have to find your own answer, and your party should find an answer. Otherwise, you could be a good man, but never get a majority. Or you could get a majority, but you will never be a good man. So you must somehow mix up the two things. It's very difficult anyway, especially when the surrounding so often hostile to your approach. So it's very, very difficult question. And one of the reasons why we are not successful enough in the European politics, I mean Christian Democrats, is that we haven't clarified that question.
Unfortunately, I get signs that Donald Tusk, Angela Merkel, and François Hollande are waiting for you, and we have to finish. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you.